but it's certainly from my own experience. I kind of gasped when I first read it, and I thought, wow, this makes so much sense. This makes sense about my own experience in terms of, for analytical idealism, the idea is that reality itself is this field of subjectivity, and that our little sense of self, for example, is actually in itself an experience. It's not the experiencer. And it was that for me that I thought, that's it. That's where I land. And that doesn't mean that everyone else has to land on that, because there's many different philosophical ideas about the world that position consciousness first, really, in that way, as the ontic principle. But for me, it just completely resonated. And again, as a social scientist, as someone who's always looked at language and identity, now consciousness and self, kind of moving, a bit deeper with this and my own academic journey, it's incredible explanatory power. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, in addition to being a social scientist, you describe yourself as a student of philosophy.
A student, absolutely. Still a student.
So,
yeah.
How does your understanding of philosophy support your research, which is actually social sciences, of course? Right?
Yeah. So again, social research and areas of social science, such as critical childhood studies, have kind of always looked a little bit at ontology. So they have always questioned the material and the biological. They've got a history of doing this, but they always, seem to land on constructionism. So it's kind of, they want to know what this is about, but they're still at the level of the epistemic level, of the epistemological level, about that. It's all about the relationality of how things are related to each other, and it still doesn't go quite into that. Yeah, but what is it? But what is it? What is this? So again, when we're doing research projects with people, we just make a clean assumption that this is an individual in the world, and they are part of that social group, and if I ask them questions about their experience, I'm going to get really valid answers. Well, actually, you're not, because you're asking the conceptual sense of self. You're asking the social identity, so you're going to get sets of answers that are filtered through that conditioned lens. And can we really claim that as some kind of epistemological or ontological truth? And if we want to privilege and prioritize what people say, we have to have a really strong argument for that. So does that make sense? So it's like part of this is trying to say, well, we need to ask first, who am I? Instead of us, again, assuming. So for me, ontology is really, really important in social sciences. And even in social research, which is a branch of social science that works really directly in the life world. Habermas called it the life world, with everyday people, to affect change. Because what's the point if we're not changing anything? We can talk about these matters all day, and we can say, well, is reality like this or is it like this? And it is so important, because that's the thing that can instill change. But we also, and we're doing a lot of that in the academic realms, but people on the ground, it's not reaching them whatsoever. They're really, really suffering. And they're really, really suffering because we're living in a material world. And these are individual biological machines, and they are trapped as such. So it has to change.
You know what my biggest problem is with materialism? I'll tell you what. Is the following. So people who say, for example, extrasensory experiences in children can only be explained in the context of machine breaking down, right? But the assumption they make is not conscious, in my view, right? And there is an ontological assumption there that we are a machine.
Yeah.
And that drives the rest of the questions and answers and the rest of it. So if you want to be materialist, at least be a conscious materialist. You accept that, right?
Yeah.
And not just go through medical school and this is how we were taught and that that's what reality is. And nobody questions it. We just
No.
run with it, right?
We don't have time to question it,
We don't have
especially when
time.
you're in a job like that. It's like the grind, the wheel, it's that,
Yeah.
it's that, it's that, it's that. And I think that's a reflection of the mess that we're in as well.
Yeah.
As I said, we're not given time to contemplate. We're in this very fast-paced, competitive, economically driven society where we are not afforded any space to sit back and reflect and think, well, actually, is it like that? And I don't know if you've noticed that, because I think that's part of the problem as well.
I was lucky enough, I had philosophy at university, even though at that time I thought, what a nuisance, I just have to pass it. Honestly, sorry. Sorry to all philosophers out there.
No, but you do. You start to think, well, so what? Because that's all good and well. But when you're working with people and you see and you're very up close to that suffering, we understand that position of, well, so what? But it is important, and I think that's what I was trying to say earlier. Yeah,
I would say everybody should have a philosophy
absolutely.
course, or at least a minimum basic, so that at least they can position that model. Where does it belong? Is it materialism? Why? What other alternatives? And we are not doing that, I think.
No,
currently.
And we don't do it in schools either with younger children. So again, we've just wrote a paper actually about this project where we went into school. It was actually with Fred Matzer and the Essentia. This was a bit of a project we did in 2022 or 2023, but we've analysed the data and we've looked at what happened, and we've wrote a paper on this, which is really good. In a nutshell, the school now have changed some of their curriculum to allow children to do philosophy. But there's a difference, isn't there, between that taught philosophy, so what you might learn at university in that kind of curriculum, where it will be, no, we're going to choose what philosophy, because that's the other thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
We're going to tell you what philosophy you
So
have to learn.
Cut all the Plato.
And exactly, and if it doesn't meet our schema of materialism or whatever it is, of our curriculum. But the wonderful thing about children is that they are natural philosophers. And so it's not even about teaching philosophy, with the younger children. It's about, again, affording them a space just to be themselves, to be curious and creative and ask those really big questions that adults will always run away from. As a parent, when your 6-year-old child asks, what will happen when you die? Where will you go when you die? What is dying? All these that we find, again, really uncomfortable because we don't know how to answer them.
Do we know? We can't answer to ourselves, right?
We can't answer to ourselves. But again, we don't really have any kind of alternative narratives to even begin. Because the other thing as a parent, if you start to tell your child maybe an alternative narrative, you're always feared then that your child might be a social outcast if they have these ideas. So parents have all these fears because, again, of the structure that this is happening in.
Yeah, pressure to conform, especially in school age, it's extreme. Yeah.
The teenagers more so. It's very, very difficult.